Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Lamed Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Mona Fishbane in loving memory of Bernice Fishbane. To Nana, my beloved mother-in-law, my role model for passionate adult learning, whose yurt site is the fifth candle. Chanukah Sameach to everyone. We are going to start at the Mishnah at the top of our daf. Shor shel pikeach shenagach shor shel shoteh v'katan chayav. If we have a shor that belongs to a pikeach means a regular person who's grown, who has knowledge, understanding. Their shor attacks the shor that belongs to either a cheresh, which in halacha is generally a deaf mute, which nowadays might be understood very differently. In fact, many of the commentaries already say that deaf mutes of today are not the same as the ones considered by the Mishnah. They're considered people who don't have understanding. So it'd be someone who has not only doesn't hear or doesn't speak, but also doesn't understand things properly. Again, where the line falls is obviously a confusing line to draw, likewise with the shoteh. Shoteh is either someone who has lost their mind, so to speak, or has cognitive disabilities. And again, the question is to what range of cognitive disabilities. This is a very unclear line where the line is drawn. But these are people that potentially could have property or a katan. Katan we seem to mean here a minor who is an orphan. You'll see the Gemara is going to relate to them as orphans because probably if they had parents, then their parents would be the owners, or particularly fathers in those days would be the owners of their property. So now we have a situation where we have someone who owns property, but they don't really have an understanding. Now, the whole idea of watching your animal is that you're supposed to understand how to watch your animal. Well, if someone's ox gored one of these people's oxes who doesn't have proper understanding, it doesn't really matter. It's their property that was damaged and the person has to pay. But if it's the reverse case, but if their ox gored someone, then they would be exempt because they can't be held responsible. In general, they're really not held responsible for their actions. And if their animals cause damage, we can't necessarily hold them responsible. We're going to get to another, I think it's on page Zion. I think it's a Breita. Can't remember now if it's a Breita or a Mishnah, but there on Daf Zion, yeah, it's a Mishnah. If they themselves damage other people, they will be exempt because they're not held responsible for their actions. So we have all these categorizations. We have these people who are in this category where we're not going to hold them responsible. Now, question is, if the question is really, right, are they, we're going to see soon that we're going to talk about, they're not liable also. Okay, sorry, lost my train of thought. One thing is also, either we say they're just not responsible in general, they're not obligated in mitzvot, or we could also say that they are, it says, ki gach ish shor, ki gach shor et ish o et isha. No, it's not that one. Notes that I took. Is it here? Yeah. Okay. It says ki gof shor ish. Right. That's the pasuk. Ki gof shor ish is that the person's ox gores, and these people are not considered having the knowledge or understanding of other people, and therefore they're going to be exempt. Okay. So those are reasons to say they're a patur. Shor shel cheresh shoteh v'katan shenagach. However, there's a problem. If their shor continues to gore, Beitim mamidim lahem apitropos. So mamidim umeidim lahem b'fnei apitropos. Now you might remember it talks about they have to read the muad b'ba'alav, that in order to become a shor muad, you need to testify to its owner. Now here we don't have an option to testify to its owner, but if we don't create a situation of a shor muad, then this ox is going to keep on goring, and we have a society to protect. So we have to balance the not making them liable with the fact that we have a society to protect. So comes the Mishnah and says we have to set up someone who's in charge of their animal and will be probably liable for damages. We're going to have to see exactly what the extent of the responsibility of the apitropos is. We'll see that the Gemara understands here that the apitropos is actually going to be, the Gemara is going to think that it means also that they pay damages even if it's just a short time. Okay, we'll get to this and we'll say that creates a problem because didn't we just say they're exempt? So we'll talk about that soon. But right now, we're not exactly sure what their level of responsibility is, but certainly they're there in order that they can start setting up a case and establishing that this shor is dangerous. If the deaf person all of a sudden became aware, stopped being deaf, was able to speak, was able to communicate, they have knowledge, or the person who was not of sound mind now becomes of sound mind again, or the minor becomes older already, Rabbi Meir says, even if we established a case that this is a shor muad, the shor starts from the beginning and they become a shor tam. It's a very interesting thing. Rashi says, what's the issue here? And this is something we'll see in the Gemara later, that changing domains changes things, okay? The animal was a muad under one owner and then moved to a different owner. They're no longer muad anymore. That could be, first of all, there's all different reasons it could be, right? Either it all has to do with the owner and not the shor. We had a whole debate about that. Or you could say that it could be the shor behaves differently with different people. If you have a dog and then you give your dog to somebody else, the dog might start acting differently, right? Because different owners, first of all, they, in general, they might start acting a little bit crazy in the beginning just to get used to you. But in general, it causes different behavior, right? Like kids, they'll test the boundaries. They'll know where your boundaries are, but they'll test them with other people, or they'll know that they can get away with things with you, but then they have a new owner. They might actually be much more well behaved in the beginning. So it all changes. It shifts. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi, no such thing. If the shor is a wild shor, it's going to be a wild shor no matter who is the owner. So if it was already a shor muad, it will continue to be a shor muad. Shor ha'itzdadin, if you have a shor from the stadium, that means a shor who was trained to be in bullfights. Well, eino chayav mita, shene'emar ki yigach v'lo sheyigichu. Okay, the shor does not get the death penalty, because basically, right, the expectation is that the shor is a shor nagcham because its nature, and therefore we're going to kill the shor. But here, people caused it to be. They created the scenario where the shor becomes this crazy shor. And that's not anymore. That's a whole different situation. We're going to have to see. And they learn it from the pasuk, ki yigach, the shor, it's of the shor's own volition. But if ki yigichu, people caused the shor to gore because they created the situation of a bullfight, that's a whole different story. We'll get to this later, not today in the Gemara. So first, the Gemara starts off with an inner contradiction in the Mishnah, and whether you think it's really a contradiction or not is a good question, and we'll see how they resolve it, and then we'll see, oh yeah, maybe that's a better way to understand the Mishnah. Hagufa kashi. Amal shor shachere shoteh b'katan shenagach shor shopikeach patur. We said this shor is exempt. Alma ema midim apitropus litam likvot migufo. Sounds like this shor is exempt. Now, normally, if it's a shor tam, what happens? We pay from the animal itself. So if the animal gores, the animal just goes to the other person, right? Again, assuming the value and all that. But ema seifa, it sounds like we don't then set up an apitropus. The child is exempt for the damage that the shor caused. But then it says, shor shacharei shoteh b'katan shenagach, beidim mamidim lahem apitropus, umiidim lahem b'fnei apitropus, which sounds like, alma mamidim lahem apitropus litam ligvot migufo. Now, it wasn't so clear that this was what it meant. But they're assuming that if you already set up an apitropus, which means, what's their assumption? Their assumption is, now, first of all, most Yatomim have apitropsim. They have people who are in charge of their guardians, who are in charge of their property. But it doesn't mean they're responsible for their animals. The assumption here is that we're putting up either somebody new or the same person and telling them you are now responsible not only to manage their money, but you're also, and to make sure people don't take advantage, but in addition, you're responsible to watch that their animals don't cause damage. Now, if you remember, we learned that if someone's watching someone else's, you're a shomer chinam, say you're watching for free, someone else's animal, and the animal damages, right? There was a debate there whether we assume you're automatically responsible for damages or depending on the arrangement. But for the most part, we say you're responsible to pay for damages of the animal. So if we're putting up some apitropos to be in charge of the animal, then it sounds like they're going to be liable for damages if there are damages. So you can't say in one hand patur and in the other hand, but yet the apitropos is going to have to pay. And we're going to see in a minute like where the apitropos pays from. But in this case, forget that. In this case, we're going to pay from the animal itself, which means if it's paid from the animal, that means that's a loss for the child and the cheresh or the katan. So basically, it sounds like they have to pay. To which Amarava, Rava says, no, hachi katani. This is how you should read it. If the animals are nagchani, meaning if the animal gores once or twice, we're just going to leave it. But if you start to see a pattern and you see this animal, now it's a good question. What's the pattern at 2, at 3? We don't know. It's not clear whether this is fitting into our typical shor muad. It did it 3 times already. Or maybe just if you see it starts to do it more than once or twice, then, well, right, let's say it does it once, more than once already, maybe, or 3 times, we don't know. But if huchziku nagchanim, which is not clear how to read this line, what exactly makes them huchziku nagchanim? And do you need that there was testimony about each time? Or do you just get a sense that this animal is a crazy wild animal and has been causing damage? Then again, we have this problem. We have to protect society. Mamidim lahem apitropus umidim lahem b'fnei apitropus umishavin lahum muad. We're never going to pay from this animal. This animal, even if you have an apitropus, the apitropus is not liable, or the child's animal is not liable if it gored as a short time. But if we start to see that, and we don't even do anything right away, okay? We start to see there's a problem. Okay, so let's just start with the simple. We start to see this animal gores. Okay, no responsibility. We don't even have to do an apitropus yet. Only once we start to see a pattern do we say, let's make an apitropus. But the apitropus has one goal only, not to protect and to make the animal liable right now as a short time. No, to start building a case that this will be a shor muad. Then they start warning. They get 3 warnings, right? And then they become a shor muad. And at that point, then the apitropus will have to pay min aliyah. And we're going to see from whose money is he going to pay. That's exactly the next question. But then the apitropus will definitely pay the money. The question is from his own funds or from the child's funds, because already once it becomes a muad, it doesn't pay from the animal. We pay money, right? The value of the damage done. Me'aliyatman. So who does he pay from? So just to clarify, we've resolved this seeming contradiction that we thought once there's an apitropus, it means the apitropus pays even for the short time, the half damages. No, just for full damages when the animal becomes a shor muad. Me'aliyatman. So whose money is it paid from? Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat yitomin. It's paid from the orphan's money. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina amar me'aliyat apitropus. He says no, it's from the apitropus. So now they question Rabbi Yochanan. Umi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Could he have possibly said this? Because we're going to have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan that seems to contradict. Ha'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav Asi. We're not up to Rabbi Yochanan yet, but we're going to first have what Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav Asi. Then we're going to have Rabbi Yochanan says about that. And then it will be clear that that contradicts what he says here. There's a general rule that we don't take away orphans' property to pay for any debt, anything, unless there's interest payments or something like interest payments, which means if in the long run, okay, let's backtrack for a minute. When can we collect from orphans? When they become of age. First of all, there's an issue that you're supposed to, there's a mitzvah to pay back a loan. The mitzvah is only on someone who's obligated to mitzvot. If you're not even reached the age of mitzvot, then you're not obligated. So we wait till the orphans get older and we collect all the loans when they're older and they can have a say in them. But there are certain things that we do pay. And those are things that could create a financial loss down the road for the orphans. Like, for instance, if there are interest payments, then we'd rather pay the money now than have all the interest payments over time. So now we're going to hear Rabbi Yochanan Amal. So Rabbi Yochanan gives examples. What would that be? And that's the Rabbi Yochanan statement we're looking for, meaning Rabbi Yochanan agrees that you can't collect from orphans. So that's going to basically question here. How can you collect from the orphans' money when there's no loss? Why don't you just say, okay, wait till the orphans get older and then take the payment for the damage they incurred? Because there's no loss here. There's no interest. So Rabbi Yochanan Amal, either it's you borrow money with interest, right? Let's say you borrow from a Gentile or borrow money from the Beit Din or something where there is no interest, where they can theoretically, or a case where like there's Hedger Iska, there's cases where you can have interest, let's just say, where I don't remember exactly if it's in the court, but there are cases where interest is permitted. Okay, there's ways around the whole interest thing, but not individuals. And we'll get to all that. We'll get there in Bava Metzia, so we'll wait till we get there to go into all the details. Oh, liktubat isha mishum mezoni. Okay, what is that? If you remember learning in Seder Nashim, we learned that basically, how does it work? A woman is promised money from the ketubah. If her husband dies, which is the situation here, we're talking about orphans, then the wife can either collect her lump sum payment of the money promised in the ketubah, which is 200 zuz if she was a virgin, plus sometimes there's Tosefet, whatever else he promised her. She can collect that all as a one lump sum payment. Or until the time she collects her payment, she can get mizonot. She can get monthly payments for food. And then she can later collect her lump sum ketubah. So it's in the woman's best interest to keep getting these monthly payments and only later to collect her ketubah. But if the orphans, now, it's not to say the orphans can choose when to do this, because really she does. And then also there's the issue, there's a whole machloket, at what point is she not entitled anymore to be getting these mizonot? Like if she already is getting married to somebody else, or there's different stages of when that would be. But in any case, if they pay the lump sum ketubah, they no longer need to pay mizonot. So it's in their best interest to pay the ketubah. So if she wants it, for example, then we can pay her the ketubah money and prevent the orphans from having to pay this monthly payment all the time and incurring a loss over time. So those are two examples. But notice it's not the case here. There's no loss for the children if we push it off. So they'll pay it later, the same amount. To which Kamma answers, first answer, ipuch. Okay, it must be Rabbi Yochanan doesn't contradict what he says there. So let's flip who says what. To which, right, Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat apitropsim, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina amar me'aliyat yitomim. So if we switch who says what, we can resolve the issue. However, Rava says, what kind of craziness? Amar Rava, mishum dikasha Rabbi Yochanan to Rabbi Yochanan, because you have this inner contradiction between Rabbi Yochanan says here, Rabbi Yochanan says there. Mishavale the Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina to'eh. You're putting Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina in the other position, which makes no sense. Forget that it was said by Rav Asi and Rabbi Yochanan added to it and explained it, but everybody holds that way. It's basic. It's aleph bet. It's everybody knows that. So you're going to put Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina in a position where he contradicts a basic halacha of not collecting from orphans until they get older. How can you collect from the orphans now? It seems crazy, right? Why would the money be the orphans' money? It should be the abitropsim money. So they say, "V'ha Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina dayanahu v'nachelum kedidina." This is part of the question. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina is a dayan, and he was a knowledgeable dayan, and he for sure knew this halacha. So there's no way you had to contradict to the Rabbi Yochanan. She made Rabbi Yossi the bad guy, so to speak, of the guy who didn't know what he was talking about. That's unfair. So Rava understands this whole thing differently, and he says the following: Now he says, wait a minute, this is a unique exception to the rule. Yes, we have a rule that, in general, we don't collect from Yatomim unless we have something that's in the best interest of the Yatomim. If it's in their best interest, we'll make an exception. But there's another exception. If the orphan's animal damages, then also there's some other thing pulling at us. What is that? Protecting society, right? So now, Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat yatomim. You would have to take it from the orphans. Why? Well, the whole thing is that society is going to suffer now because there's a wild animal running around. So what do we have to do? We have to create a guardian. The guardian will be responsible. But if the guardian knows that they're going to have to pay out of pocket for this, you're never going to agree. So then you're going to have a situation where the children have animals running around wild, causing damage. Nobody's in charge of them. So if you're going to make the guardian responsible, turning out I'm a bet, no one's going to want the job. So you can't make the apitropos responsible. You have to make the children responsible. So even though in general we don't collect from orphans, if we don't, this is going to create a problem for our society as a whole. And therefore, we override that principle. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, amar me'aliyat apitropos. Now, why does he think that that's not a problem? What about protecting society? He says, it's not that they have to pay out of pocket forever. They pay out of pocket temporarily. That's not going to prevent anyone from doing it, since they know eventually they'll be able to get paid back. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan thinks, no, nobody wants to pay out of pocket and collect it later. Well, you never know if you'll collect it. Maybe they won't have any money left. Maybe, they won't pay you back. They'll have to fight for it. Yeah, no one's going to do that. But Rabbi Yossi says, well, and it's not going to be a loss for the apitropsim. That won't prevent people from doing this job. Right? So, okay, that's that. So now let's just review quickly. We had the Mishnah, which set up the difference between, right? Basically, our main halacha, which was a child, shoteh katan, that has a shor. They're not responsible for damages. However, if we start to see the way we eventually understood the Mishnah, if we start to see a problem, we put an apitropos in charge. And if the shor becomes a shor muad, they get warned. If it becomes a shor muad and then damages again, then we'll have to pay from the best money, meaning the best money and the amount of damage that was done. And who's going to pay it? Machloket Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, the apitropsim, and collect from the children. That's Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, or Rabbi Yochanan. The children will have to pay right now, despite the fact that we have a principle we don't generally collect from them. Now we continue. Mamidim lahem apitropus letam ligvot migufo. Now, we mentioned before that it was possible we could have inferred from the Mishnah something which we said we don't infer from the Mishnah, which is that in the end, the apitropsim are responsible even if the shor is a short time, and then the person who was damaged can collect from the animal. That was what we suggested. Said, no, that's not what the Mishnah is talking about. But now the Gemara says, Tanaihi, that whole issue. Is the apitropus responsible for paying for the half damages? Meaning, once there's an apitropus, the nizak, the person damaged, can actually collect from the animal itself. And as again, doesn't mean the apitropus pays out of pocket, even according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina here. No, we just take the payment from the animal, means the orphan will lose out. That whole thing, whether we can do that or not, is a machloka between Tanaim. How do we know? Tanya. We're going to quote a braita which has two parts to it, and then we're going to explain each part and show how the first part is actually this machloka. It's not so clear from the simple reading, but we will explain it that way. Shor shenitchashu ba'alav, v'nishtatatu ba'alav. Here we have someone who actually was fine to begin with, and then became a deaf mute or became without sound mind. And then this is a third case where the owner left town and now there's nobody watching the shore because the owner left town. Yehuda ben Nekosa Amar Sumchus, he says in the name of Sumchus, Harehu betamuto ad sheya'idu bo b'fnei ba'alim. He remains a short time until you testify in front of the owners. I'll see exactly what this means very soon. B'chachamim omrim, ma'amidim lahem apitropsim u'mi'idim bahem b'fnei apitropsim. So the rabbis say we put up an apitropis and we testify in front of the apitropsim. Now, nitpakeach acharesh nishtapa shoteh v'igdil katan. This is the second part of the braita. If all of a sudden they went back to being totally fine and clear-headed and understanding, or the minor became old, or the ba'u ba'alav midinat hayam, the owner came from their vacation, they came back, or their work. Yehuda ben Nekosa amar Sumchus chazar letamuto ad she'idu bo b'fnei ba'alim. Now, right, it now reverts back to being a short time, which was strange. We'll see why in a minute, because right until it goes back to being a short time, until you testify now in front of the owners. This sounds like what we talked about at the end of our Mishnah. Once you have Shinur Reshut, it goes from the apitropos back to the owner. We start the whole thing from the beginning. Now, remember what Yehuda ben Nekosa said in the name of Simchus. It sounds like, unless you have Baalim, it's going to stay a short time. But it also sounds like, from the end, that from the last thing you just said, that there is an apitropos. So it must be there is an apitropos, so then we're going to have to figure out, well, then what's the difference between him and the Chachamim in the first part of the Mishnah? And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi matches Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah that says basically once the apitropos, we switch from the apitropos back to the original owner, well, he remains still a shor muad if he was a shor muad by the apitropos. We don't think changing reshut makes a difference. Amru, so now, after they quoted this braita, they said, "My hareu b'tumato de kamar sumchus." What does that mean? If you're going to say it doesn't actually ever become a shor muad, Hamid Katani Seifa, it says in the Seifa, Chazar letamuto michlal tiyayid. It says he goes back to being a short time. It sounds like he did become a shor muad at some point. Ela mai hareu b'tumato. So what does that mean? He remains a tam. Doesn't mean he remains a tam. Okay, because he can become a shor muad once you put an apitropos. So what could it possibly mean? Harehu bitmimuto delo machzerinane. He remains as a bitmimut. That means he remains, he doesn't lose anything, which means alma ema bidim apitropos letam ligvot mimamono. In other words, we keep the shor. You'll never lose the shor because there won't ever be a payment of this kind of shor for a payment of short time. Okay. In other words, even when there's an apitropos, this shor will never be paid for damages. Okay. You'll only have to pay if it becomes a shor muad, and then you'll have to pay out of pocket the expenses. But the shor doesn't have to pay damages for short time. There's no chatzi nezek of a short time. By the way, there's a whole question as to why this opinion holds, right? And this is the one that matches our Mishnah, that there is no payment. You're going to see Chachamim in this bright to disagree. because I'll just finish one line and then I'll go off on a tangent for a minute. Which means, right, if you testify before the apitropos, what it means is, what it must mean here, again, it's not the simple reading, but again, there is no way to read the simple reading. It doesn't really make sense. So it must be that the rabbis are saying you can create an apitropos in order to pay for the half damages of the short time. Now, then it just says, I'll finish one more line and then we'll stop for a minute. Seifa b'mai kamiflagei. So what's the seifa argument that we already know? Reshut mishaneh ika benayu. Sumchus haval reshut. Excuse me. Sumchus haval reshut mishaneh. Rabbi Yossi savar reshut eina mishaneh. Okay. Does changing the owner change things and revert back to being a short time or not? And that's the same machlokes we saw before. Now, I want to explain based on Rashi and Tosfot on Amud Aleph actually. Why does a shor, this very long Rashi in the beginning on the Mishnah, why would a short time not have to, why would the Hatan not have to pay the damages for the Chatzi Nezek? Right? If we are going to make them pay for a muad, why wouldn't we make them pay a Chatzi Nezek? So there's a bunch of answers given. Each one has a bit of a problem with it. But I'm going to get into all the issues, but I will mention them very briefly. So Rashi suggests a few things. Number one, he says maybe knas, it's knas. If you remember, there's a whole debate. Is short time, is Chatzi Nezek short time? Knas or mammon. If you say it's knas, well, yatomim, orphans don't have to pay knas. How do you relate that to the cheresh and the shoteh? I'm not sure, but yatomim don't really pay knas, so that could be an answer. Also, when it comes to yatomim, if we're going to focus on yatomim, there's a concept that we don't take money from yatomim from non-land, only from land. Okay, weakness of that, and that would be not animals. And that's why you can't take the payment of the short time. The weakness of that is that's really talking about if your father owns money, not if the child has its own expenses. Tosfot says that it's possible to view it that if you view the Chatzi Nezek is really you have to pay full damages. Remember, if you say it's mammon, it means you really have to pay full damages. Just the Torah was lenient because you weren't expecting it to happen. Well, you could just take that even farther and say, in this case, the Torah was lenient because the Torah in general is lenient to orphans and shoteh and cheresh, and we're just going to be more lenient and just say, okay, fine. In this case, we'll just be fully lenient and not make you pay at all. That's another possibility. There's weaknesses in all these, which is why there's multiple opinions. Okay, moving on. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to quote another Braita with a new opinion. Shor cheresh shoteh v'katan shenagach. Rabbi Yaakov mishalem chatzi nezek. This is a kind of funny line because you can read it depending on how you punctuate it. I'll read it a few different ways. Some of them are kind of funny. A shor v'cheresh shoteh v'katan that nagach. Rabbi Yochanan pays chatzi nezek. Okay, which doesn't make any sense. The Gemara is going to say because the Gemara is going to first read it that way. Rabbi Yochanan pays half nezek. What every cheresh shoteh v'katan the damages. Right, the Gemara says Rabbi Yochanan might be the tay. What did he do? That he has to pay half damages? So the Gemara is going to say, Ala Ema, Rabbi Yochanan Omer Mishalem Chatzi Nezek. So they read it differently. They say, Shor, Cheresh Shoteh V'Katan Shenagach, Rabbi Yochanan colon, as if Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishalem Chatzi Nezek. Okay, that's the easiest way to read it, the more reasonable. There's another funny way you can read it, which the Gemara doesn't even suggest. But Shor Cheresh Shoteh V'Katan Shenagach, Rabbi Yaakov, Kamma, right, it's just a funny line. You can put the comma somewhere else. Just if it gored Rabbi Yaakov, then Mishalem Chatzi Nezek. Okay, it's obviously not the way to read it, but it's just a funny way to see that you could punctuate the sentence differently, and you pay off damages if you're sure gored Rabbi Yaakov, not if it gored anybody else. Of course, there would be no reason to say that, but it was just fun. So now they say, okay, b'may askinan, what's the case? When is a shor cheresh shoteh v'katan going to pay half damages? Okay, so let's see. Ibitam pshita. If it's a short time, well, obviously, if you're going to say that the owner, despite the fact that they're cheresh shoteh v'katan, has to pay damages, and maybe because you have an apitropos, and then they pay for a short time. Well, you don't have to say mishalem chatzi nezek. You could just say mishalem because the kulei almanami chatzi nezek hu mishalem. Everybody pays chatzi nezek for short time, so it wouldn't be necessary. He would just say chayav, and then you would know chayav what. You'd obviously be chayav to pay like anybody pays for a short time, which is half damages. Even muad, if it was a shor that was already forewarned, well, then it doesn't make any sense either. Why would it be half damages? Ida avdele shmira klal by l'shlume. If you've done any kind of shmira, then right, because for a shor muad, if you remember, right, we're going to see this. If you properly I'm trying to think how to read this. Ida avde leshmira klal lo bai l'shlume. I say it must be like this. If you did shmira properly, then klal lo bai l'shlume, then you wouldn't have to pay anything at all. Ida lo, because if you properly protected your shore and somehow some crazy thing happened and the gate, you had a very solid gate and somehow the shore opened the gate, or you know what happened. That's not your responsibility. You protected it the way you were supposed to protect it. If you didn't do shmira, kule nezik by l'shlume, then you have to pay full damages. So there's no case where a muad would have to pay half damages. Well, maybe there is. And we're going to see right now two possible explanations. Amarav. La'olam b'muad. Really, we're talking about a shor muad. We're going to talk about a case where you did a smaller amount of protection. You did protection, but not the best kind of protection. You didn't have an alarm system set up, I'm just saying. But you did a certain amount of protection, but not a lot of protection. But Rabbi Yaakov several like Rabbi Yehuda. So now we're going to hold that. Okay, we're going to hold a few things about Rabbi Yehuda. One, to Amal, Sad Tamut Bim Koma Umedet. This is a review of some things we saw about Rabbi Yehuda before, which is when you have to pay full damages for shor muad, it's not like it's all full damages for shor muad. It's got half of the short time that already it was owed from all the previous times. Also, this time at gores, it still owes half damages, but we're going to add on another half damages for muad. Why is that relevant? You'll see in a minute. Secondly, also, Rabbi Yehuda Da'amal, muad sage le b'shmura pchuta. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a shor muad, it's enough to just watch it, a small amount of shmira, okay? Basically, because we saw this in the Meiri, it was a very strange thing because he says a tam needs better protection than a muad, which is counterintuitive. But the Meiri explained that a shor muad, everybody knows it's a shor muad, and therefore they'll shy away from it. They'll protect themselves from it. So therefore, by you doing minor protection, that's enough, really. Short time, nobody knows to prevent themselves, to protect themselves from. So you're fully responsible. Again, you're only going to be responsible for half damages, but you're fully responsible for those half damages. If you didn't do a strong amount of protection, then you're actually fully responsible. Then you're fully responsible for half damages. So now, what does that have to do with anything? We need one more thing, and then we'll put them all together. And it holds like the rabbis in that mission and the Braita that we just quoted, which said that the tam would have to pay half damages. This child, once you have the apitropos is responsible to pay half damages. So now, how does this all work? So now we're talking about a shor muad, but you did enough shmirah for the shor muad. But since the payment for shor muad is made up of half shor tam and half shor muad, and right, that's sad tamut bim koma umedet, the tam part still stays. And you did a shmirah pchuta, which wasn't enough for a short time. Again, that would have to hold by both those opinions of Rabbi Yehuda. So you'd have to pay for the tam part. Now, you only have to pay for the tam part if you hold by the rabbis that the tam that the apitropos takes responsibility and has to pay for a short time. So assuming all those three, which by the way is already quite convoluted, okay, and later the Gemara is going to say, why did he go so far as to explain it in this way when there's a simpler way to go? But that's how you could get to half damages. Okay, so again, let's explain it from a different perspective. Let's start from number one. It was a gores shoteh katan, and they had an apitropos, and the apitropos is responsible for tam damages. But we're not talking about tam damages here. We're talking about muad damages, because tam, it would be obvious, pay chatzi nezek. If you're just saying they're responsible, it would have been much simpler, and you wouldn't have even added chatzi nezek. So Rabbi Yaakov, who says nezek, chatzi nezek, must be talking about a muad, but a muad that you did enough protection to protect the muad. But the problem is that we still view the tam part. That's, again, only Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is this. And the tam part you have to pay. And this whole thing of shmirah pchuta mu'ula is also Rabbi Yehuda. So that's why you're going to end up having to pay for the fact that you didn't do enough protection from the tam element, and the tam part you're going to have to pay for. So that's how he explains it. Like I said, quite, one of those over the ear, stretch your arm over the opposite ear, like, why'd you go so far? Comes Abai and he's going to say, wait a minute, Amar Abai, v'lo pligi. 1 minute. Doesn't Rabbi Yaakov disagree with Rabbi Yehuda? You're saying he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, but look, Hatanya, it says in a Braita, shor shel gores shoteh katan, shenagach, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev. Rabbi Yehuda makes you obligated. Rabbi Yaakov omer chatzi nezek hu mishalem. Now the assumption is that they disagree, because it says Rabbi Yehuda obligates, And Rabbi Yaakov says it's chatzi nezek, which sounds like Rabbi Yehuda holds full damages, and Rabbi Yaakov holds part damage. So it sounds like they argue about this case. How could you say he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and that's how he gets the chatzi nezek? To which Amar Rabba bar Ula, don't question from that Braita. Masha mechayev Rabbi Yehuda peresh Rabbi Yaakov. Not two different opinions. It says Rabbi Yehuda obligates, and then it says, and Rabbi Yaakov explains what's the obligation. It's chatzi nezek. So that's not a problem. However, Abaye obviously didn't agree with Rabba, and therefore they're going to ask, Ula Abaye damar pligi b'may pligi. According to Abaye, who says they argue, what's the debate? Amar Lacha says this is what the debate is. And I think that Rabbi Yehuda disagreed with Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yehuda held full damage. Rabbi Yaakov held half damage. And why is that? He explains it's a muad, but not that you did part protection and not full protection. You didn't do any protection at all. So you had a shor muad. You didn't protect the shor at all. Now, Rabbi Yaakov savarlaka Rabbi Yehuda b'chada upalagale b'chada. So Rabbi Yaakov held like Rabbi Yehuda on one issue and disagrees with him on another. Savar Rabbi Yehuda b'chada either Rabbi Yehuda savar tzad tamut b'koma umed, and that he agrees that a shor muad has two elements. It has the shor tam and it has the shor muad. So therefore, if you didn't watch it at all, you're going to have to pay. Okay, we'll see exactly what you're going to have to pay. Hold on for a minute. Now, Rabbi Yehuda holds, how does he get to full damages? Because Rabbi Yehuda says, you have the part of the shor tam that you have to pay. Why do you have to pay? Because mamidim apitropus, and once you have the apitropus does have to pay for the shor tam. Rabbi Yehuda holds like the rabbis on that issue. And then shor muad, well, you're liable for muad because you didn't protect your animal at all. So of course you're liable for the muad part, and that's how he gets to full damages. Rabbi Yaakov is not going to agree with Rabbi Yaakov Savar Ein Mamidim. He's not going to think you have to pay the tam part. It's the opposite of the previous explanation. He thinks the tam part doesn't need to be paid. And the Lo Mishalem Ela Palga de Muad. Okay? He says you only have to pay the muad half. In the previous explanation, he said you only have to pay the tam part because you did enough shmirah for the muad part. This is the opposite. You only have to pay for the muad part because you don't pay for the tam part if you're a gores shoteh katan, even with an apitropus, like we saw in our Mishnah, and the opinion we saw in the Braita on the second Amud today. And that's our two explanations. So comes the Gemara, and we'll just start with this question. Okay, Abaye makes a lot of sense. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Machloket is really, do you hold by this issue of mamidim apitropus l'tam or not? And as long as you hold sad tamut b'koma umedet, that muad is made up of tam and muad, then you could see that there would be this machloket of, do you pay the tam part? Do you not pay the tam part? And would you get to them full damages or half, even in a shor muad? Ela l'Rava damar lo pligi. Rava, who thinks they don't argue, you didn't have to do it in a muad case. You could have done it in a tam case. And we'll see what the options are in tomorrow's daf, what they suggest could be. Okay, so going back over the daf, we started with the basic case in the Mishnah that the shor of a gores shoteh katan is going to be exempt from payment, even though one would have to pay them for damage they did to their shor, but basically will be exempt. Then there's this thing about the apitropus, though. We had to figure out what are you putting the apitropus there for, and then we saw that there was actually a machloket. Does the apitropus is there an obligation then to pay for the shor tam once there's an apitropus in charge or not? That was on the second part of the daf, and then we had when the apitropus is there and the shor becomes a shor muad, is it paid from the Yitoman's money, or is it paid from the orphan's money, or is it paid from the apitropus, from the guardian's money, and then only he gets paid back later from the orphans? Then we got to this issue about, again, is there payment or not for a shor tam? We saw this debate in the Braita, and then we got to this opinion of Rabbi Yaakov that you pay half of damages, and then we had to figure out what's the case. We saw Rabba's explanation, which was a bit convoluted, Abaye's explanation, which was a little more straightforward. Both of them think it's in a shor muad. It's just a difference between what kind of protection did the owner do, and the apitropus. And then we're going to get to why Rava was so convoluted. Why didn't he do something a little bit more simple? And we'll suggest a different way of understanding the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. With that, we'll end for today. Wishing everybody a happy Hanukkah, and like always, hoping for good news.